from your own designs or folding from other crease patterns, the next step after you fold it is to share it with other people, and that usually means photography. So today I'm going to walk through how to prepare your tessellations to be photographed, 4 different setups that I've used for tessellation photography, and the post-processing steps that I find essential in creating the highest quality photos. So first up, how do you prepare an origami tessellation to be photographed? Well, one big component of that is the paper choice and whether it's 3D. So if I have pieces made of taunt, I'm going to be paying attention to what color is this, because this is a much more vibrant color than the sky tone. So that's going to determine my background for the photo. It's going to determine some of the camera settings, for example. I'm also paying attention to whether it's 3D, because all of the pieces that are not 3D, I like to press in a stack of acrylic. So if I have this stack, it's actually quite hefty, I can put in a full piece, then add the next layer. I can put in 4 or 5 minis and add the next layer. And I'm leaving these in the stack at least overnight, if not longer. Usually I'll accumulate patterns over 2 or 3, sometimes 4 months, stacking them as I make them in order to photograph them all at once. So batch processing for me is most important because I have a huge backlog. I have almost a 2-year backlog at this point of tessellation photos when I'm posting them at a rate of 1 per week. And then the next thing to consider is, what shots do you need? For me, I've settled on doing a view frontlit from, so when I say frontlit, I mean that the lighting is only from the front. And I typically use this particular blue piece of taunt as my background. And I'll line up the paper, line up the piece on the inside, and I'll have some alignment. Either I'll go with the edge being pretty flat or the pattern repeats being pretty flat. And then I'll take a photo of that. I'll take a photo of the opposite side in a similar alignment, just flipping over. And I'll take a photo with light shining from behind. And those 4 different setups I'm going to talk about are different ways to shine light from behind. So one thing you might notice is that this piece of paper doesn't cover my entire camera view. So I have other pieces of paper that I'll put around and underneath to get a pretty similar color under this one, so my camera isn't picking up extra light from elsewhere. This is just making the background consistent, making sure that the only area of focus is the tessellation. And then as for how to take those photos, there's kind of 2 main levels for the actual photography, which is you can use your phone, which works great, and you can either like have a tripod of some kind, something to hold your phone steady, and there's clicker buttons, there's all kinds of ways that you can make this fancy. Or you can have a fancier camera, which I'll be showing in a minute. And so that's basically the options for actually taking the photo. Then getting the backlighting, those options are going to be hold it up vertically to a window. You can tape it to the window, and there you're going to want to use like a washi tape or something that's removable, or you can just tape it to the window permanently. You can, and display it there. You can hold it up to a lamp. This is the first stage, using things you already have on hand: windows, lamps, other light sources, and the phone in your pocket. The second stage is if you want to get a little bit fancier and take photos on a flat surface, you can get a light table. And these tablets are often available online. And you can see my camera just refocused on the shininess there. So that is a downside of this particular setup. And let's see if I can get that to focus correctly with the tessellation on there. Okay, so you can see that I have this shiny reflection on this surface. That's a major downside of this method. And then the next method, well, the other major downside is it's small. You can get larger tablets, but this particular one I was using when I was living in an apartment, and I was folding mostly things around this size, maybe this size. And so it didn't matter as much that it was small because everything would be fitting in those bounds. But these days I fold patterns this size, and you can't get a square cropped image with a white background of this piece on this tablet. So the next thing I moved to was a softbox, and that's actually what is shining the light that's reflecting here. It is a light on a tripod with a kind of plastic fabric cover. You can see this is much larger than the tablet. And this is square. I want to crop my photos square because I'm mostly posting them to Instagram and using them on my website. And I like square photos for both of those. So this is pretty good. The one thing to keep in mind is these fold lines. I ironed those out on the second softbox that I was actually using for photos. So what I would do is I would set this up pointing up, but it's on a tripod. I had to go up on some steps to be able to take the photo from above. And at this stage, I was still using my phone. And then I started editing the photos, which has a lot of benefits, especially with these kinds of early setups. But I'm still editing my photos with my current setup, which is, you can see I have everything accessible right from my desk, which is kind of key. So my current setup is this massive 2-foot square wall light that my dad put some pieces of trim on the edges so it can lay flat and the cords can still go out where they need to go. This one has a special feature, which is that you don't see that reflection from the light. So it has a matte surface, and that means it's much easier to, one, not have yourself in the reflection, two, not have your camera in the reflection, and three, get an actual consistent lighted surface behind your piece. So putting that down, then the next step after you've, well, okay, I did say I would show you my current camera setup. So I've got the overhead camera, and I'm going to switch this. You can see I'm also using OBS, and that allows me to switch views. And so I have a particular view in OBS to just to do photography. So right now my camera's in video mode, and that has certain focusing properties, etc., etc. I can change the exposure, and I do like to change the exposure, increase the exposure for backlit photos, so I'm not doing as much adjusting in post-processing. And then, so what I actually do is I bring up my light, I place my papers over it, and then I have a stack of tessellations sitting on one side, and I go through and I do, okay, front photo, click, back photo, click, pass that off to the other side, stacking it there. And then once I've done all the frontlit photos, I'll remove the papers, turn on the light, and come back and do back side, click, front side, click. And this helps me keep the same orientation throughout because, like you saw, I have multiple potential orientations of this piece that are pretty close together. So that's something I'm paying attention to as I'm doing the photography. I'm doing batch processing, so I'm not doing this every week. And I'm making sure that my photos are very consistent, that I'm always taking the photo at the same distance from the camera, because I want to be able to have those photos be very interchangeable. And now that we've talked about the photography process, let's take a look at any editing that needs to happen. And actually, before we do that, I'm going to show you some different photos that I've taken with different methods. So here I have a whole bunch of photos that I took on that Softbox, the like directly on the light with the fabric cover. The downside of the Softbox is that that fabric is soft and it bends. And so a lot of the photos are going to be warped. And then the other downside is that you can see that this is fabric in the background. It has some wrinkles, it has some inconsistencies. And then this is what my photos looked like when I took them, when I re-photographed this piece later with my better methods, which I did for most of the pieces that I photographed that way because I was updating I was making Tessellation Garden, my repository of all crease patterns, and updating my photos, updating my PDFs. You can see I used these photos in the PDF cover page for the crease pattern. And so I wanted the best quality photos possible so people could fold as easily as possible from my patterns. And then we can look at some other ones in here. If I go to the compound twists, a lot of these were originally photographed before I had my new method. And so you can do some editing to fix things, but for example, this one, you can see that that's really skewed, that a keystone shape that needed to be corrected because of the way that fabric slanted. I didn't have it exactly centered, or I was holding my phone slightly slanted. So one other thing that I have with my current camera setup is a bubble level to make sure it's actually pointing down. And for post-processing, when I take my photos, they look something like this. But that's not quite what I'm going for. For one thing, I want to crop it square, and I may as well do some extra light editing while I'm in there. So this is the final form of that particular photo. So going back, notice it's grayer. The background is kind of gray. It's the paper itself doesn't look as bright. And then now it's very centered, it's brighter, and we have that square crop. So that's what I'm going for when I'm editing my photos. Let's take a quick look at some of those photos that I edited most recently. And there we go. Usually I have this in a slightly different arrangement, so it's making it a little bit harder to find things. So let's say I have one of these raw photos, and I'm going to open it up with GIMP. I love my open source software. OBS is also open source. And so this is a full piece. I've got pretty good horizontal alignment. What I want to do here is go in and say colors, exposure, perhaps, and I want to see, okay, get it a little bit brighter. And one of the other caveats here is I always edit my photos on the same exact screen. I always use my laptop screen. Right now I have it over on my second screen, which shows up slightly differently. That's the other reason why I use OBS, to see what my camera is seeing when I'm taking my photos, because I want those photos to look good on my laptop screen and be consistent on my laptop screen. So I'm using my laptop screen to see what the camera is doing. So just like this video, I'm using OBS to see what my camera is seeing. And then I'm taking the photo, and when I then import it onto my laptop, I can edit it on that same screen. And this just really helps with consistency across multiple photography rounds. So I can adjust the exposure. I also adjust the brightness and contrast. And this one doesn't need much adjustment. I'm going to do, yeah, not that much. That's good. Okay, and then I'm going to, I use keyboard shortcuts all the time, so that was Shift-C to go to crop. And I'm going to make sure that I have a fixed crop 1:1. I bring it up and then I zoom in to the center and make sure that that little plus mark is exactly on the center. Then I can zoom back out. That was another keyboard shortcut that I used. And hit enter to crop. And so I can, again, zoom in with keyboard shortcuts so it exactly fills the screen, and verify that that is indeed what I want. And then I can save that, I can export, I can make sure that when I export, so let's see that, let's say I just want to use this name, and I'm just going to add an A at the end there. And I have this quality option, and it says file size unknown. Well, the way to get it to show you the file size is to click that show preview in image window. It's coming up as 3.3 megabytes, and that is excessive. You don't really need more than 1 meg. So I'm going to go and say, what's the file size if I do 70 here on the quality, 1.1 megs. There are some like calls for photos, calls for diagrams, calls for things that have limitations on the file size. So I might want to get it just under 1 megabyte. That's a common photo size limit. So I'm going to say 65 there, and that gets it to 950 kilobytes, which is approximately 0.95 megabytes. And then I can say export that, and it'll make its new image. And that's basically the whole process for how I do things. The one small caveat that I'm going to say is when you have very light colored paper that you're photographing, the background will show up more gray. So that one compared to this one, or even if I go to a different colored paper, when you change the brightness and contrast with this pink in the middle, you're going to get a much whiter background, and you're not going to get anything whiting out in the middle compared to this whiter butcher paper. It's a thinner paper, more transparent. You can see already we're starting to lose some details from the whiteness. And so making it brighter is just going to wash out those details. So on those particular photos, I make it as bright, as high contrast as I can, but then I'll go in GIMP, and I'm just going to exit out of here, and I can use the paint bucket to fill in white on the outside. So that is helpful if I want to, for example, have a white background in some of these graphics in Canva. Of course, with Canva, you can also remove background directly. That's something that's been working a lot better recently. It was not working as well a year or two ago, but it's using AI and figuring things out better now. And then the other layer of consistency that I need for my photos is I do these 4-view videos, which is I'm putting in just photos, and it's appearing like the backlighting is showing up and the paper is flipping over and the backlighting is going away. And these images are all pretty well aligned, even though I didn't go in and explicitly align them. Because I'm doing all the editing at the same time, I'm making sure that they look pretty much the same in terms of lighting, in terms of editing. I'm making sure that the crop is pretty much the same. And with that motion between photos, it's really hard to tell that I didn't go in and specifically align every point to every other point. So that's the level of consistency I'm going for in my photo editing. Now, there's so much to talk about when it comes to Origami Tessellations, and the sharing of the photos is kind of something that gets a little left behind sometimes, but it's important if you want to make this an art form that you do consistently. It's important to know how to share this with your friends, with a wider audience. And so I wanted to give you these tips on photography, and I'll make sure to add links to all of the tools and like for those different stages of backlighting your photos. I'll make sure to add those links in the description below. And these will be affiliate links, so you won't pay anything extra, but I'll get a few cents if you do decide to buy through those links. And yeah, Origami Tessellations are just so gorgeous, especially when you have the backlighting. One of the comments I often get with my photos is, "Are you sure that's not computer generated?" So this is often like coming from mathematicians or people in the general public who don't know that I have been folding these things very intricately for years. They'll often ask like, "Whoa, those photos look so perfect. Are they computer generated?" And it's not, it's all a manual process. So that is all for this live stream, for this video. I hope you have a great day, and consider taking some photos of tessellations and sharing them. I always love seeing photos of what people fold. Feel free to tag me at Gathering Folds on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll let you know what I think about it. So happy folding, happy photographing, and see you next time.